Okay, good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Oregon Early Learning Council. We appreciate all of you being here to talk about the governor's recommended budget. The governor will be joining us shortly, and we're fortunate that we have our agency partners here, many of the directors and their staff, to talk about how this is a system development budget for early learning focused on families and their children. As is the approach that the council uses at our meetings now, I'm going to open with a land acknowledgement, and we're taking this from the document that tribal leaders in Oregon put together called Essential Understandings of Native Americans in Oregon. And today I'm going to be reading the third essential understanding, which is history. Histories for Oregon tribes did not begin with the westward expansion's eastern invasion. There were and continue to be lasting impacts of colonization. Over time, impacts were significant as the federal government, through congressional acts and more, encouraged the migration of non-Native Americans across the country, many landing in Oregon. This included an invitation to various Christian religious denominations to establish churches and schools so that Euro-American ideals could be forcibly fostered. These new populations coming from a variety of countries, backgrounds, and ethnicities held unique ideas about their role on the new landscape. As these new immigrants settled, they carried distinct cultural ideas and practices, including ways to farm, hunt, and organize their lives. More often than not, they saw the indigenous nations they met as not just different, but inferior. Between the illnesses they carried and a distinct use of violence for power and control, these newcomers fundamentally altered the lifeways of hundreds of nations that were previously culturally intact. So I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to the tribal leaders for pulling together this document and reminding us of our state's history. I don't see the governor on yet. So let's just talk a little bit about the background. There's her early learning policy advisor, Alyssa. Welcome, Alyssa. This meeting is being live streamed, just so you know. So anyone who wants to jump on is welcome to do that. As council members know, we did receive one piece of public testimony. It was from the executive director of the Reach Out and Read program. I encourage you to look at the letter in which she is suggesting that if they get funding from the legislature, they would like to have their program embedded in the early learning division as a way to start consolidating more of the early learning programs in the early learning division. And I believe the governor is about to join us, which is perfect timing. So, Governor Brown, welcome.
Thank you.
We're really happy to see you.
I'm happy to see all of you, and my apologies. Technology has not been working well for me today, so it's good to see all of you. Thanks for your time and energy.
We want to thank you for your time, and we want to thank you for the investments in the early learning system that are in your budget. It's quite remarkable and very heartening, to say the least. So we'll turn it over to you, Governor, and invite you to make any comments that you would like to.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, everybody. I know we're all ready for 2020 to be over. I think it's fair to say it's been an extremely challenging year, but I also know that from our greatest challenges spring incredible opportunities. I will say that this budget is probably the hardest one that I've witnessed in my 30 years of public service. And, you know, given the challenges that we faced this year, obviously another one of them is the financial situation that the state finds ourselves in after, frankly, suppressing economic activity. And that certainly makes it challenging when our budget runs on, frankly, that economic activity. So I will just be upfront with all of you that the budget doesn't have enough money in it that would meet my goals, from investing in education and early childhood to frankly making sure that everyone has access to healthcare in this state. But we are going to continue to have these conversations, and I am hopeful that we can at least hang on to the investments that we've made in creating a system of early childhood care and education. So in terms of my focus and my frame, I have frankly used the recommendations of the Racial Justice Council to center the voices of Black, Brown, Indigenous, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Pacific Islander, Asian American, tribal Americans, and others at the very, very core of my work. And we really put the request of these communities at the center of our work. I know we cannot eliminate racism overnight, but we're going to keep working at it day by day and brick by brick. In terms of the education piece, and frankly, at the request of the RJC, we have kept our Student Success Act whole. This is our new program, frankly, to invest in transforming our classrooms. Our K through 12 number is at 9.1 billion. The total package for education is roughly $10.2 billion. So we were able to make a significant investment in education, and frankly want to hang on to that, though I know it's not perfect. I'm also excited that we were able to fully fund ballot measure 98, career and technical education. So in terms of early childhood education, you know, we certainly are excited to see the work that you have done and the cross-sector lens that you've applied to the early learning system through Raise Up Oregon. Some of the highlights in this arena that I want you to be aware of: in early care and education, we've added an additional 108, close to 109 million if we round up, to increase access to high quality early care and education, including expansion of affordable childcare and preschool and early learning supports to 8,000 more Oregon children and their families.
Yay.
Yay!
Yes, yay.
We included about $6 million to address suspension and expulsion in early care and education settings. I think you all are familiar with the situation where children as young as 2 are being dismissed from their classrooms. I also believe that by establishing workforce supports to help early learning educators better meet the behavioral and development needs of our kids in their care, that we will reduce these issues. In healthcare, we've got significant investments across the map, from $10 million to expand the Oregon Health Plan to include uninsured adults and adults who are not documented. This will be a pilot program, and it builds on the work of Cover All Kids. We are investing $200,000 to create a new tribal traditional health worker program for Indian healthcare providers, and recognize traditional tribal-based health practices as services that the Oregon Health Plan will reimburse. And one other addition, which is really the help of the Behavioral Health Advisory Council, close to a $30 million investment in diversifying our healthcare workforce and frankly, our behavioral health workforce, which is, given what we've been through the pandemic, is long overdue. In terms of human services, we were able to hold harmless our investments in ERDC and increase services in child welfare by investing 1.3 million in crisis and transition services and 5.7 million in interdisciplinary assessment teams for children and families involved in the welfare system, a child welfare system. So we essentially held whole the investments we made last biennium and have worked to increase those. Housing was significant. We are continuing our $250 million investment in affordable housing, but we also invested over 20 million in initiatives to promote racial equity and home ownership, $15 million in permanent supportive housing. Just to give you a perspective in terms of the housing crisis, in the last, let's see, it's 2020, I've been in 5 years. The last 4 years, we've invested over probably close to $750 million in affordable housing, rental assistance, and home ownership. That is more than we have spent than in the entire history of the state of Oregon combined together. So it's significant, but it also, as you all know, from what's happening on our communities on the ground, it is frankly just a drop in the bucket. So we've got huge challenges ahead regarding housing. Let's see, I did K through 12. I'll just add, we also added an additional 14 million to support distance learning and teaching innovations to support our that particular program and to assist with the expansion of Oregon Open Learning, and some additional resources to address the social and emotional learning standards. That's brief highlights. Again, it's obviously the beginning of the conversation. What I would like your help on is, number one, preserving these investments. I think they're significant. Over $280 million of specific requests from the Racial Justice Council. And obviously really excited about the investments in early childhood education and care. I need your help. I need you all to be working through your networks. My understanding is that the federal talks are not going well, but we absolutely need additional federal assistance. We need our federal government to make an investment in Oregon and frankly, the rest of the country, so we can begin rebuilding and healing from all of this. And then we've got some issues around healthcare in terms of putting together enough resources to ensure continuity of the Oregon Health Plan, where we've added 150,000 Oregonians and have, unfortunately, a budget gap, even despite the passage of the cigarette tax. So I'm hoping that I can get the hospitals and providers and labor to come to the table and all of that. So I will just leave it at that. It's great to see all of you. I desperately wish we could be in person, but I am incredibly grateful for your leadership, your partnership, and our collaborative efforts. So take it away, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Governor. And I am guessing you are signing off. Is that right?
I got a few minutes, I think.
Okay. Any quick questions from any council members? Questions or comments?
Sue, I'd ask whoever goes first. Anna's fine.
Oh, go ahead, Katie.
You guys are too nice.
We're so polite.
I know.
So Governor, I just wanted to thank you so much for all the good work and including childcare and early learning in your budget. It means so much for families and for women in particular trying to return to the workforce after COVID, something that I've been doing a bit of research on myself. And we've tried to initiate some pilots during COVID, and we had to back off on those just because of the chaos that is going on out there. And we look forward to working with the state in reinitiating as we look at recovery. So is there any insights that you would want to share of what might accelerate that recovery and getting more childcare online quickly?
Well, we lost about 50% of our childcare provider workforce through the pandemic, both because of requirements around COVID and also, frankly, families were unable to pay for childcare. So we've been working as hard and as robustly as we can to make investments, but it's going to be really challenging. What I feel really good about is that we will have, after mid-January, a federal partnership with the Biden-Harris administration. They understand the importance of childcare as not only in terms of making sure kids are well cared for and that we have a trained professional workforce that's able to, frankly, make a living off of that work, but they understand the importance in terms of keeping our economy rolling. And so I'm hopeful that that will be some a good, strong partnership that can help us really rebuild quickly. I don't know if Alyssa, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's right. We definitely need federal support. I think the Early Learning Division's done an incredible job of pushing out resources very quickly. It feels like every few hours I get an update about the number of dollars that have gone out the door. So just big kudos to the division for that. And but we need that external resource. It's been those federal dollars that have really helped us keep those providers afloat and opening back up.
And Katie, I will just say I really appreciate your leadership on this issue. I do think the business community is going to look at these infrastructure supports differently moving forward, not just frankly childcare, but paid family leave. I do think that the pandemic has really opened a lot of people's eyes into the importance, frankly, of primarily women, but frankly, having parents have the supports they need to be able to participate in the workforce. And I think it's going to be a game changer moving forward. I hope so.
Yeah. So Anne, we'll quickly go to you and then let the governor go.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Governor, for your support for all of the work in early learning and for early childhood development. It's quite astonishing that you've been able to protect it this much in this environment. I would like to talk a little bit about rural areas and to say that I'm so grateful to you and your leadership with the Racial Justice Council for making sure that people of color and others are well covered by all of the investments that we're making. As you know, we have our saying in rural Oregon that says rural is its own inequity. And some of it, and we have a lot of people of color in rural areas, and I'm really pleased that the work of the Racial Justice Council will cover those. But there are some specific circumstances of rural that we need to attend to that have to do with the structure of supports for early child development, the design of it, the funding of it, the policies and regulations that are unique to rural. And I know that you are aware of those, but I just want to also say, I'd like to continue to explore with you and everyone here about what kinds of adjustments we have to make, whether it's about ratios, adult kid ratios, whether it's about rural urban subsidies and so on, that still needs some work. And we look forward to working with you on that. And I know you're open to it, but I wanted to say it here in this context.
Absolutely. I'm well aware that rural Oregon is definitely a historically underserved community as a whole. We have, I think there's some interesting things happening on the ground, and I do believe very strongly that, frankly, your work and others can help us build the supports and systems that meet the needs of rural Oregonians. I will say, just so you know, we've invested over $100 million in broadband focused on communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, but also to ensure that every school is connected. So I think that's key. I think I'm hoping at the end of 5 years, and I won't be here, but some of you will be, that we get every school, every home, and every business connected in Oregon. And then we made significant investments in community redevelopment, most of it targeted, frankly, toward our fire development, fire impacted communities. But there is roughly, I don't want to guess, a couple $100 million in terms of community redevelopment that will impact rural Oregon. So we're hoping to pull that across the finish line as well. So
Thank you.
Awesome. And Governor, on behalf of the council, and you've heard me say this from the council perspective before, governance is a huge issue for us. It's one of our top priorities. We know that you are involved in lots of conversations dealing with that, but both with the moving of ERDC and also the establishment of an early learning agency, so we can finally combine and align and really consolidate the early learning programs that are necessary if we're really going to support families and children throughout Oregon. So let us know how we can support your agenda in that arena as well.
great. I just had a good conversation with Representative Zika and Representative Power about that work. And we're really excited to support them and work with you to make this happen. So thank you all. I'm getting the hook from my team here. Really appreciate your time and energy.
Governor.
Keep up the great work. Stay safe. Have a great holidays. Don't see your family. Don't see your friends.
Sounds perfect. Thanks. All right. We will now go to our agency partners, and thank you for being on this call. I know how busy each of you is. Since we've been talking about healthcare, Pat Allen, why don't we start with the Oregon Health Authority? And Pat is the director of that agency.
Sure, thanks, Sue. And first, just let me endorse what the governor closed with. We actually look like we came out of Thanksgiving not doing as much damage as some other parts of the country did, and that's thanks to people doing hard stuff, not getting together as much as they would with family and friends and those kinds of things. So please plan a boring Christmas with very few people and lots of Zooms and all those kinds of things. In terms of our budget, I think there are two things that I would expand on that the governor talked about. The first is the Oregon Health Plan. As I think you all probably know, most kids in Oregon are born on the Oregon Health Plan. And so it is a fundamental and foundational part of the healthcare system in the state. Oregon has one of the higher rates of health insurance coverage at 94%. And that's maybe eroded here a little bit in the last couple of years, but it's quite high. And one of the things you frequently hear is it's great to have health insurance coverage, but it's not helpful if you can't use it. And the Oregon Health Plan is eminently usable. There are no copays, cost sharing, premiums, any of those kinds of things. And so when a kid or a family is on the Oregon Health Plan, they're able to access all of the benefits in that system at any time that they require them. There is a shortfall in that budget, driven by several several things. We did about 80% of a long-term sustainable financing plan in the last legislative session, but there were about $300 million of that plan kind of left on the table that didn't quite get finished. And then, as the governor indicated, enrollment in the plan is up by actually it goes up month by month during the pandemic, but it's up nearly 200,000 people, or about 20% over where we were before the pandemic started. And that's driven by a couple of things. Surprisingly, it's not driven by job losses. And I think at the beginning of all this, we expected there to be lots of people losing their jobs in their healthcare. But after watching what was going on in the economy for a while, it was kind of one of those, duh sort of moments. The people who lost their jobs didn't have healthcare anyway. They were already on the health plan if they were in the service industry, entertainment industry, food service, those kinds of things. So what's going on really is there are two federal mechanisms that have been put in place. One is when people apply to go on the Oregon Health Plan, we no longer require the degree of paper documentation that we did of income and those kinds of things. And so there's a presumption that they're eligible. But even more significantly, every month there are people whose year of presumed eligibility expires. And in an ordinary year, we ask them to demonstrate that they're still eligible. And some percentage of people don't ever respond, and so they get dropped off the system automatically. CMS had to stop that process. And so the enrollment has been building as people who would ordinarily automatically roll off stay on the system. So that's been driving that. So she's proposed some steps to close that budget gap. including cost containment for coordinated care organizations and a reduction in reimbursement rates for hospitals. And the hospitals are unhappy with that and have been pretty loud about that. And so I think anything that you all are able to do to help emphasize the importance of the Oregon Health Plan in that fabric of especially children and families meaningful access to healthcare. Is Cover All People. You probably recall Cover All Kids was an effort 4 years ago to basically cover children in Oregon, basically 100% of children in Oregon, regardless of their citizenship status. And it's been generally successful. Uptake has been slower than we would have liked, driven largely by the federal tone and rhetoric around immigration and deportations and those kinds of things. And so our enrollment has underperformed a little bit. But it's just a hugely important element of making sure kids have access to healthcare. During the pandemic, we've really had driven home lack of access to healthcare, particularly for people who don't have legal residency status, is a huge barrier to being able to fight the pandemic. Access to a primary care provider, to a healthcare system, to a place to be able to go to get tests or get healthcare or now to get vaccines is a big barrier to particularly the Latina population that are the most disproportionately impacted population in the state. And so what the governor's budget envisions is beginning to take preliminary steps toward basically covering all people in the state, regardless of their status. And we start with the Daca recipients, adult Daca recipients, as a kind of a first step or a down payment toward broadening that coverage. It's a challenge because unlike the rest of like with Cover All Kids, but unlike the rest of the Oregon Health Plan, there's no federal match that goes with that, and we have to do it 100% out of state funds. But it's a huge step toward health equity, and it's a huge step toward now we can see dealing with the underlying structural racism and unfairness in the system that really creates meaningful challenges in people's ability to access healthcare that affects not just those people, but all of our communities. I think those are the two most important things I would point out. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, I think we'd better keep going to our partners, and then if you're able to stay on, we'll come back. Thank you, Pat.
Happy to.
Colt Gill, who is the head of our Department of Education. Welcome, Colt.
Hi there. Thanks for allowing me to join you today. I'll show, I think, 2 or 3 slides, if that's okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And I did, since Alyssa brought this up, I wanted to do just a quick shout out to the incredible work of getting the money out the door to various childcare facilities. So in doing that, I want to kind of call out some of the behind the scenes unsung heroes, I think. We have our accounting unit that's led by Christy Miller and Julie Hansen. They've been working with the Early Learning Division since early summer and have now sent out over $53.8 million of coronavirus relief funds to help keep over 3,000 childcare facilities open across the state of Oregon. So this has involved about 8,000 transactions. And in the month of December, we'll transact another $20 million before the spending deadline on the 30th. So that is an incredible amount of work. And for us, it comes right in the middle of them also completing our year-end financial statements and working through our annual financial audit with the Secretary of State's office. So just wanted to do a shout out for some of those behind the scenes people that help make all this happen as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. I think that the governor talked about, or you could hear clearly through the things that were funded in her recommended budget, what some of the focus is clearly on access to childcare and high quality preschool, on some of the other pieces around preventing the suspension, expulsion, or removal of students in early learning. There is a focus in the education side on diversifying the educator workforce, again, from early learning on up through higher education supports in that area. Really a strong focus, and especially with the help of the Racial Justice Council, to support different programs that are aimed at meeting the needs and building on the strengths of students who have long been marginalized and underserved in our systems. So you can, and she talked about broadband as well. So those are kind of the big picture issues. As far as how organizations fared, the operations at the Department of Education, and that includes support for the Early Learning Division, went up about 0.5%. So that doesn't quite keep up with costs, but it's close. We did see reductions at the Oregon School for the Deaf and in the K-12 grant and aid programs, but we saw a significant increase in spending at the early learning programs of a little over 16%, you can see there. So what this means for us is that the K-12 grant and aid, it decreased by a little over 5%, again, while early learning increased by 16%. This meant a shift in some programs. So we did see the K-12 SMART program unfunded, and Reach Out and Read maintained full funding. And we moved it from what it was for some reason in the K-12 grant and aid section. So we moved that into the early learning grant and aid section where that makes more sense. Sadly, we did not receive as much as we requested in the agency request budget for EIECSE, the Early Intervention and Early Childhood Special Education. So we're about $14 million shy of what we think is the adequate service level for that area. And I think that should more funding become available, we'll continue to work towards building that up. The student investment account was also reduced by $206 million due to the decrease in revenue from the corporate activity tax, the CAT. The student success or student investment account was impacted by those CAT shortfalls. It's the largest part of the student success account, so it was the one that received the greatest impact. All of our affinity-based student success plans, though, so these happen for our American Indian Alaska Native community, our African American Black student success group, our Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Indigenous people student success group, and now an LGBTQ2 SIA plus student success group, all receive funding or new funding or funding increases. And each of these programs can support investments in early learning. As can the student investment account. So it's a possibility while there's a decrease there, districts will still receive some funds and may invest those in early learning programs. We received a $3.6 million investment in mental health and social emotional learning and social emotional learning standards that the governor touched on. So these are trauma-informed, self-driven, strengths-based, equity-centered programs, and they have an impact on the P3 continuum for sure. And then finally, the governor talked a little bit about capital improvements. So several school districts around the state, as they have applied for these capital improvement funds in what we call the AWESOME program, OSCIM, these oftentimes also include space and supports for capital improvements for early learning centers that are operated either by school districts or in partnership with school districts. So I think that that's just an important one to point out. And that's it, Chair Miller. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, thank you, Colt. We'll keep moving through the agencies, and I know you may have to drop out. I don't know how long you can stay on, but thank you very much for being a part of this.
Thank you.
Let's go to Caleb, whom I'm not seeing on my screen.
I'm here.
Sorry, there you are. Hi, Caleb. Good to see you. Caleb is the Deputy Director of the Housing Authority, Housing Community Services. So welcome, Caleb.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. And I also have a few slides I'll pull up. And while I do that as former CFO and an accounting manager, I have a soft spot in my heart for recognition of transactions and accounting staff. So Colt Thank you on behalf of all accountants for your plug of the unsung heroes there. And I'll be relatively brief. I know this council has a lot of business. Just echoing what the governor said at the beginning of the meeting, she has invested in the last 2 biennia, the current one we're currently in, and again in this, both record-breaking growth budgets for Oregon Housing and Community Services, really unprecedented growth in the programs that the state administers, all the way from the continuum of homelessness, getting people off the streets and into shelters, transitioning into permanent rental housing, and eventually into home ownership. So this is about a $350 million additional state investments in growth for housing and community services, a lot of which is targeted at families. And so we're just super grateful for her leadership there as we try to tackle the many challenges that our state has about housing stability. So I just have a few slides of this. First slide is just a little bit of a recognition of need. The point in time count is one of the best data sources we have for homeless individuals in the state. It is by no means perfect. But this slide is showing the left bar that at 3,449 households with children, Oregon has the highest rate of homeless children in the country. So the blue bar represents what, families in shelter, and the green bar represents unsheltered families. And so just a huge need for these investments. The other bars there in the middle is households without children, and then the one on the right is unaccompanied youth, and you could see that is disproportionately unsheltered for that population. This council knows this very well, but just a few things as far as the tie between housing and education. The first point there is poor quality housing has lower kindergarten readiness scores. The next 2 bullet points there is just really talking about mobility for children who are living in poverty. More than half of them moved during early childhood, and actually, sorry, more than half moved more than 3 times before the age of 15, and the majority moved at least once. And then each individual move, just a single move, is associated with about a half-a-year loss in educational attainment. So just speaking to the need for stable, safe, and affordable housing for families. And then the final bullet there is just about homelessness and the ties between health outcomes and developmental delays. So just a few points about why we see the social determinants of health and housing being so critical to early childhood education. So this is just a quick snapshot of the new investments that the governor made in the budget at our agency. Again, we have programs and services that are on the whole spectrum of housing, from housing stabilization, which is, from getting people off the streets into shelter, and then more prevention services such as rental assistance and utility assistance and asset building programs. And then trying to get families and households into affordable rental housing, permanent housing, and then eventually into attaining the dream of home ownership. So these are not all of our programs, but these are just the new additional investments the governor made. I'll probably focus on 3 of them that are particularly pertinent to the work of this council. Starting on the left side, there is a broadband assistance for low-income Oregonians at 6.4. This is a brand new program for us. The governor mentioned the disproportionate impact the pandemic has had as it relates to the need for broadband and education. And so this is a new investment to help ensure that our kids have the access to the broadband that they need to be able to go to school, to be able to be successful in school. then kind of moving across the spectrum, I think probably the biggest single investment is the bonding that Governor Brand mentioned. There's $250 million in Article 11Q bonding. Most of that is going to go to a program that we call LIFT, the Local Innovation and Fast Track Housing Program. Two things to point out there. That program heavily incentivizes family-sized housing. So it's a development of permanent housing program. It's for new additional housing units. We have programs that both preserve affordable housing to make sure it stays safe and healthy, but this will add thousands of new units, prioritizing family-sized units to be able to get our families in there. This program also heavily incentivizes and has in statute to be targeted toward communities of color. We know that our low-income communities of color are disproportionately represented, and so this program is one of the most effective tools that our agency has to build that housing. And then finally, the last one that I will point out here is on the home ownership side of the spectrum. And there's a number of investments that the governor has made here. There's a specific $2 million investment that came out of a legislative task force aimed at addressing racial disparities in home ownership. So that is things like language access, funding for culturally specific home ownership centers and organizations. There is significant investments in down payment assistance that is, again, specifically geared towards households of color that have historically been left out by housing policy of being able to access and attain home ownership. And so again, just kind of some unprecedented investments that the governor has made in our agency to help families have a safe and stable place to call home.
Wow, very impressive list, Caleb. Thank you. Great slide. Great slide. And these are all being recorded so people can refer back to them again as well. Liesl Wendt, I believe you are on from ODHS. Am I correct? Yes.
Yep.
Hi, Liesl. Thank you for
Hi.
joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. I'll take some time and I'd like to hit on a couple things that the governor didn't talk about, and then I'll provide a little bit more detail about some of the things that she did. We actually just finished a stakeholder call, so I apologize for being late. And I think as one of the things that Fairbour, as our director, talked about is the governor's recommended budget is much kinder to us than we anticipated. So I think she really prioritized investments for human services and really prioritizing individuals and families who've really suffered over the last year in particular. So we're very appreciative, and it's a great starting place to build on. One of the investments that we're particularly excited about is we had a policy option package that was focused on equity, and it was included in the budget. It's a $4.4 million investment. I think I might have talked about this before. One of the things that we've had feedback for years about, but particularly over the last year, is our acronym, Department of Human Services, is the same as the Department of Homeland Security. We like to think two very different images of agencies with the acronym. And so ourselves have started informally making a switch and calling ourselves ODHS, sort of like OHCS, Oregon Housing and Community Services, kind of borrowed a page out of their book. And that's been really well received from community. And so one of the pieces in this proposal is to do a rebranding of the agency with community, so that we're really asking community what would help you feel more included and served as we make that shift. In addition, the Oregon Trail Card, which is the card that people receive SNAP benefits on, TANF benefits, and a handful of other benefits, it's called the Oregon Trail Card, has an image of a wagon coming west, and certainly not culturally sensitive to our tribal communities and to many other communities in Oregon. And so we've long wanted to replace that as well. And so we propose doing rebranding of both, so that we could use the opportunity to be in community and have both conversations at the same time. So very much looking forward to having the opportunity to do that and partnering with many of you on that effort. A couple other pieces in the equity pop is some additional staff for our Office of Equity and Multicultural Services. One will be focused on data collection. It's a weakness for us as a state agency just to not have enough data broken out by race and ethnicity to know who we are serving, who we aren't serving, where those gaps are. So having some additional capacity will make a significant difference. The other piece that is in there is for our Office of Developmental Disability Services. Their funding is primarily federal dollars tied to very specific services, and they don't have a lot of general fund, and they don't really have a lot of room to do things that the feds don't prescribe. And so there's a package there to increase their translation services. So basically going through all of their forms, their training materials, and doing additional training for both for their staff, and this is largely a contracted out system, so for their contracted partners. So really tremendous investment for the agency, and very much responsive to what community has been asking for from the agency. One other investment in sort of both self-sufficiency and in equity is a $10 million survivor investment partnership. And this is to focus on services to be responsive for domestic violence and sexual assault. So it's a proposal that was developed with the governor's office and partners, started with a much bigger dollar figure, is down to 10, but still a significant investment, particularly for tribes and culturally specific domestic violence and sexual assault providers who, across the social service system, probably one of the most underfunded areas, and tremendous need that's actually increased since COVID, as you might imagine. So looking forward to working with partners on implementing that new program. In addition, across the agency, a couple things to highlight within child welfare. The governor called attention to several of those investments. So also really exciting. I think particularly with child welfare, there's a $4.6 million proposal to create infrastructure for the family preservation and prevention programs. I think you've heard from me, but probably more from Rebecca Jones-Gaston, our child welfare director, her vision to have children not in state custody and care, but really in community with families and community supports. And so this investment will help us take steps towards realizing that vision. The goals are to increase family access to community services and supports, hopefully reduce assigned reports to child protective services, and ultimately reduce the number of children entering foster care. Another exciting investment in child welfare is a $19.4 million investment to establish an effective respite care program. This has been a hot topic for years, and this would give us the opportunity to formalize a respite care program and really support the kind of respite that providers have been asking for and need. So the ultimate outcome of that is reducing out-of-home placements and supporting the reunification of families. So excited there. I think the other piece, particularly, I think you all know when we developed the agency request budget, looking at 10% reductions in our programs is devastating. There's nowhere to take those cuts without it having an impact to Oregonians. So both for developmental disabilities and self-sufficiency, this budget maintains current eligibility, which is significant. And I know probably less for this audience, but some really important investments in aging and people with disabilities, particularly given how hard hit long-term care facilities and older adults have been with COVID. We're excited about, I don't know if excited is the right word, but they're imperative investments, and look forward to hoping to see those to fruition. So I think with that, I'll close out. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, very much. Great laundry list. Very exciting. And then Miriam Calderon, our Early Learning Division Administrative Director. Welcome, Miriam.
Thank you, Sue, for that. That was a new title change, but I liked it. I appreciate that. It's great to see everybody. I just was taking incredible notes. I just really want to thank all of my colleagues for joining today and providing this overview. It's just really clear to see that there's still so much momentum going through related to the work to continue to implement Raise Up Oregon, as well as a focus on equity across all of these overviews that was wonderful to hear. I thought, the governor's a hard act to follow as far as the early care and education investments go. So I will just say how honored I am to be able to work with her as a champion of these new investments. It is truly extraordinary, and I know you all feel the same way. I'll touch on 3 things that the governor didn't mention, and then just probably make 2 other points really in closing. One is that the governor's budget includes nearly $1 million in resources for a new tribal learning hub. So this hub it will work in addition to, we know, the relationships that many of our current regionally based early learning hubs have with tribal nations. But, again, we are very excited about being able to work more intentionally at the state level directly with tribes, and to be able to support more access to state early care and education funding. I would be remiss in not saying, thank Angie for her leadership in this, and the really genesis was through consultation with our tribal leaders about making this additional investment in our systems capacity. We also, I want to point out, the governor talked about protecting and preserving the existing Student Success Act early learning investments, including in the early learning account. Definitely want to underscore the importance of that. Those dollars and resources have, come into communities and have been supporting an expansion of services, including during this pandemic. I want to particularly shout out nearly a $28 million investment in the birth to 5 workforce. The governor talked about the challenges. We know that as we come out of this emergency and we want to rebuild back supply, expand, including with more opportunities to expand early learning services, we have to continue to make investments in these resources. These dollars really have not yet been realized into communities, even though we had some access to these fundings and we're given these funds and we're given the go-ahead to do that. Beginning this year, we are very, very excited about the potential of being able to work with communities and increase our supports for birth to 5 educators and providers. We also, and this is relative to some work that the council has done, as well as Raise Up Oregon, are thrilled that the governor's budget included resources for us to be able to unify background checks for all early employment-related daycare providers into the early learning division. So that is something that ODHS and ELD have been working on, and was also, as I think council members will remember, a recommendation of a Secretary of State audit on childcare background check processes. I will say that, just in closing, with cross-sector opportunities, the suspension and expulsion work that the governor mentioned around preventing suspension and expulsion in ECE settings will really require and provides a great opportunity to work with Oregon Health Authority, in particular, to think about their efforts to diversify the behavioral health workforce, as well as be able to integrate with other kind of social emotional supports to be able to support caregivers. So excited to work on that. And then I really just want to underscore the governor's mentioning of preserving the investments in the employment-related daycare program. By being able to preserve those investments into the next biennium, we are going to be able to draw down, utilize existing federal funding that has come into the state to be able to support families access to affordable childcare during the pandemic. So it is really important to be able to keep those resources, to be able to leverage the federal dollars that we have to support childcare. And I think in the work that ELD and ODHS have been doing collaboratively to provide for more very supportive policies in terms of increased eligibility, zero co-pays for families during this emergency, as well as some of the policies around more flexible attendance, payment practices for providers, et cetera. We're really beginning to learn so much more about the potential of policy changes and needed investments to continue to strengthen ERDC. So hope that there will be federal funds additionally to be able able to allow us to extend these into the future. But so that's all I had, Sue. Thank you.
Okay, Miriam, thank you very much. I mean, this is such an exciting conversation because it's all this cross-sector interagency work that we've been talking about, some of us for years, years and years. So very exciting to see that, and appreciative of the agency directors joining us today in the middle of your chaotic schedules and lives. We have about 4 minutes left, and if there's a burning question, we'll take a question. And if there's not, I'm going to invite the governor's education advisory staff, Alyssa and Lindsay, to make any comments they might want to make before we close out. Hi, Lindsay, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'll defer to Alyssa as our early learning advisor for any comments she wants to make, and I'm happy to make one or two in addition.
Thanks, Lindsay. No, I just, it's been really great for me to hear all of this cross-sector opportunity. I mean, going through the budget, things jump out, but it really is exciting to see all of the ways that we're going to be supporting these young kids and their families with this next budget, and hopefully carrying that over the line. I think you all know, and the governor's reaffirmed really her commitment to early learning. I think the Early Learning Council is really special in the way you're approaching this work through Raise Up Oregon, and having all of you as agency directors here at the table for these really critical discussions. I just think it's a really great example of how we need to be talking about support for these communities. So just want to reiterate appreciation for you all being here.
Thanks, Alyssa, and thank you for your help in getting us all here. Lindsay, what would you like to add?
I would just obviously add to the governor's excitement and obviously the excitement I think that's been expressed here today about these really critical investments in early care and education. And I agree with you, Sue, to see the kind of cross-sector, cross-agency work under the Raise Up Oregon plan is really exciting to see. And now we have the important work of making sure that these investments are enacted by the legislature. The only piece that I would just sort of add, if we want to look at this from a little bit of a P20 perspective, or a sort of how we're aligned P3, is the pretty significant investment in the student investment account for school districts, and knowing that there is the opportunity for districts to really invest in not only critical supports for our historically underserved students, but also to really be thinking about ways in which we support early literacy and that really critical transition from early care and education into the early grades. And I think that will continue to be a focus of ours. I think it may be a place for this council to continue to have some focus, especially as we require under the student investment account for those plans by each district to be based on a needs assessment, on community informed planning. We tried at the outset of the SSA back in 2019 to really make a linkage between our early learning hubs and those regional conversations and our school districts, and thinking about how these investments work together. And I think we would like to see continued effort to look at the alignment of these investments across the early learning account and into the student investment account to make sure that we're maximizing impacts for our children and our families. So that's all I will contribute today, but look forward to further conversation and work through the council and through Miriam's leadership.
All right, thanks, Lindsay, and thanks for all you've done to get us to this point. You've been in this game a long time. We appreciate that a lot. Okay, we need to end our meeting. This has been very informative, very exciting. Council members, just kind of put you on alert. This is going to has set up the basis for our January 27th meeting, right? Now that we see what our agency partners are doing, the challenge for us is going to be helping to advocate for this governor's budget and maintain these investments that we've heard about today, supporting all of our agency partners. And you know, they've talked about equity, mental health, behavioral health, workforce support. They're covering, and governance. We're covering all of the priorities that the council laid out at our retreat in October. So now we just need to make sure that we're on the ground working with legislators and getting this across the finish line, as they say. So I want our agency partners to know we will be there with you. Keep us in mind as you start meeting with legislators and rolling out these proposals, because we want to be champions along with you. So thank you, everybody. And I hope you all stay safe and have a wonderful holiday season, whatever holidays you celebrate.